my concern, and this is what I help a lot of younger women through, and also male leaders that reach out to me, just to have someone to bounce something off of, right? So if we're honestly, no shit, talking about inclusion in those infantry environments, in those combat arms maneuver unit environments, not all standards are followed, right? And it's almost like sometimes those are the things that kind of build morale in a way, and it doesn't make it right, especially in kind of teetering on that reckless behavior. And from my experience and from the experience of many of my girlfriends, once you hit that full inclusion where you are included in certain behavior or like team bonding things, now all of a sudden it's a problem.
Hey team, welcome back to another week here with Drew and Alex at the Mops and Mo's podcast. Alex, good to see you.
See you too. It's been almost 24 hours.
Almost 24 hours. What's current in the news world?
Just as I was walking upstairs to hop on the pod with you here, found a new article. The Navy is adjusting what the consequences are of failing their physical fitness assessments.
Like up or down?
They are lowering the consequences. You're still whatever the Navy's version of flagged is, meaning you can't promote if you failed your most recent fitness assessment.
Sunk.
But
You're sunk.
yeah, they call it sunk, like the Army calls it flagged. Perfect. They you no longer have to have it noted in your performance evaluation, meaning if you get back on track down the road when you apply for things, people won't know you failed one. If you fail two in a row, you no longer have to get like the lowest on one category of your evaluation. And failing two in a row is no longer automatic initiation of separation proceedings. So there's a lot more leeway now for commanders' discretion on what happens if you fail your PFA.
We could probably, I mean, maybe we should do a whole episode on this. Like, what's the point of a fitness test if you can fail it a bunch?
Well, what many people will point to is like senior leaders will point to the importance of physical fitness, but it's the first lever they pull. And I hear this especially for the Navy, that fitness is the first thing they're willing to compromise on when they are having issues with recruiting and retention. Like
Hmm.
you need to man a fleet. They'll be all about fitness when they need to cut people. Like they'll ramp up the consequences if there are too many people in the Navy and they need to bring the numbers down, and they'll ramp down fitness requirements if there aren't enough people and they need to keep people in.
So it's like interest rates with
Yeah,
inflation.
100%.
Sick. Let's not address any of the other issues, like ships just being absolutely shitty. That's just,
We need a Navy expert if we want to dive into
oh
some of that stuff. I
man.
don't understand
Let's
half of
do a
it.
PT test episode one of these
I
days.
still don't know what a littoral combat ship really is, but that's a separate conversation.
I don't know much about the Navy. We'll do a Navy series. Hey, if you guys are out there listening and you know stuff about the Navy, slide into the DMs. We'll do some Navy stuff.
I'll put all the cards on the table. We really want to do an afloat fitness specialist episode because I think that's a
Sure.
fascinating topic. But my go-to guy for that topic said it's too politically sensitive a time for him to come on, so he can't do it right now. So if there's somebody else out there who's a great afloat fitness specialist ambassador, we'd love to hear about what that life is like.
Yeah, so Navy people, just reach out. We're here for
They
you.
fun fact, an afloat fitness specialist, colloquially referred to in the Navy as a fit boss, is somebody who deploys on the ship and runs fitness programs on the ship. They also, in addition to fit bosses, have fun bosses. They also deploy on the ship and they are responsible for morale and recreation type events.
The Navy just really playing into some stereotypes. Well done, guys.
A little bit
Anyway, totally unrelated to who we're talking to this
hard
week.
pivot.
Hard pivot. Who we're talking to this week?
Let's hit a bio. All right.
Sydney would
We
appreciate that, I think.
we have Major Sidney Jaques on the pod this week. She commissioned as an AG officer from the University of Scranton in 2012. For those like Drew who don't know what AG is,
I was thinking
it's
Scranton, isn't that where Office
it's
Space? Is that
yeah,
what the
it's
office?
not the office,
Yeah.
but AG is Adjutant General. People will be more familiar with just HR. They are the HR professionals of the Army. She was an ROTC cadet and 4-year basketball player. Her initial assignments included deploying to CENTCOM as a postal platoon leader. We didn't really dig into it in the episode, but my brief Googling on postal platoon leaders I think she was like serving as an extension of the United States Postal Service in CENTCOM, which is pretty funky.
Hmm.
From there to a more traditional assignment, Battalion S1 for 2325 White Falcons, 2nd Brigade 82nd. In that capacity, she was the first woman officially assigned to any of the airborne infantry battalions in 2nd Brigade. So the first woman to be down at the battalion level. And she deployed with them to Erbil and Mosul in Iraq. She then attended the captain's career course, and while she was there, trained for Ranger assessment and selection. Upon completion of RASP 2 in December 2017, she was assigned as the Regimental S1 for Ranger Regiment. She was the second female to complete RASP 2 and serve in the organization. And once she was assigned there at Fort Moore, in January 2018, she attended and graduated the U.S. Army Rangers School, graduating October 2018. She became the first Ranger tabbed and scrolled woman in the U.S. Army, first period. She served as the Regimental S1 for over 2 years, including 2 deployments as a JTF J1, so Joint Task Force. In August 2022, she created Balance Your Grit, an Instagram account and support community for women in predominantly male environments. You'll hear plenty about that in the episode, but it provides a network for, trailblazing and ambitious military women. You may have heard in our Emma episode, the AWIDA acronym, Ambitious Women in the Army, that will come back in this episode. And she facilitates mentor matching, shares lessons learned, and creates an environment to encourage continued momentum. We were originally connected to Sidney because of the Emma episode. Sydney's been a mentor to Emma as she's gone through the process of kicking a whole bunch of ass as a woman in male-dominated environments.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Emma, because I think this is the continuation of the thread that we pulled, or were pulling, I guess, with Emma, which is to say that I don't know, maybe this comes off as a little intense, but this sort of suffering in silence situation that seems to happen quite a bit with women in service, and maybe not service broadly speaking, but definitely when you get into some of these higher speed, more competitive environments, like the Rangers in this case. So I would of all the episodes we've done, I would stay tuned to the outro of this one for some interesting takes that you and I both had following the conversation. But all in all, another fascinating person to talk to, and another one that I would tell people, if this resonates with you, especially for the female listeners out there, but also with male leaders who work in environments that have females, Sidney is very accessible and is more than happy to be a resource. So don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'll say this one does get a little bit intense. As
Mhm.
usual, we try to ask questions that aren't the superficial usual questions. And Sidney does get into a little more depth in her story here. She's been on like 20 other podcasts before being here. She's played this game almost as much as we have. But we did dig into a little more of her story than she has publicly shared in previous appearances. So just, I don't want to call it a trigger warning because we're not really into trigger warnings here, but just be prepared for things to get a little bit intense with her.
And
story.
there are, I would say, I guess, depending on your editing, there are some pauses with that. And so don't worry, your audio is not broken. We're just navigating some vulnerable stuff. So props to her for coming on and telling us some of these things. But yeah, enjoy.
I've done some podcasts where it's purely like just about my career and like your typical stuff, but like you guys are cool.
Thanks.
The more fun and like humor and like personality, the better, honestly, from my end. Like
Drew and I try to stick to something. It was one of our first like 10 or 15 podcasts. It was really early. And we got a note after it, or maybe it was in like the conversation post recording. And the guy was like, "Hey man, just really appreciated the vibe." It was kind of just like a few
Vibes.
guys having a chat.
Good vibes.
Yeah.
So we've tried to maintain the like just
Yeah.
having a chat vibe.
Sidney, if the
ever
vibes
Yeah.
suck, will you please tell us? Just be like, guys, the vibes are not good.
If the vibes are not going to suck.
The vibes are not good. You're a big yogi, aren't you?
Mhm.
I started doing yoga I mean, I've done it before, but this year it was like, I'm going to do it every morning. How do you, it's like, how do you know it's doing something for you? I keep doing it. I'm waiting for something to happen.
That's yoga.
Don't. That's such a yoga answer.
No, but it is. I mean, you could have a really amazing yoga class where you're hitting like 2 or 3 new poses, or just laying there in Shavasana, just meditating, that's yoga too. Yoga's like it's a mindset. It's being patient, it's being present, it's being in tune with your body, it's listening and honoring your body. And if it starts to come, like it starts to actually start to like process and listening to the words and working on breath, and that's yoga too. Like all of a sudden it'll start clicking. And I think it's completely opposite to our culture in the military. So for some people it might take some time to be able to like start fully embracing it. I do think that it is different practicing yoga in a class with a good teacher, and also being around other people where you can feed off of their energy and share energy with them in the class rather than doing it at home.
Have you ever had a teacher sing to you?
Oh yeah, I sing back. No,
See,
no, but
I was in a yoga class and we were doing it was a substitute teacher, and we were laying there at the end and they did like the lavender towels or whatever, and
mhm.
out of nowhere she started singing.
Yeah.
And the guy that was with me, both of us were in the middle in tank tops, probably looking like assholes. And he started laughing so hard in the middle of this Shavasana meditation. And now every time I do yoga, I think about this lady singing to me while playing this meditative accordion thing. That's my yoga experience.
Yeah. I mean, it takes all forms. And it's pretty cool that he was laughing. Like if it brings out an emotion of laughter, like laughter's good for you.
Can you talk
Like,
about? I want to ask. So I asked that to like basically set this one up, and I know you've posted about this before, but I just want to hear kind of your I guess journey with this. But
yeah,
the high intensity stuff, time
yeah.
and a place. I know you sort of went through that, and now you're not there anymore. Like what did that look like for you? How's it changed over time?
So I'm still there. It's just I've matured. And I'm not saying that everybody matures out of it. And I'm not saying I'm more mature than the next person, but in my own life journey, I've matured into a different phase of my life, just within my own story. And I think I'm always going to be intense about certain things. I'm born and raised in New Jersey and raised in competition and raised in knowing how to go into that mental space of intensity. I just don't get there as uncontrollably as I used to. And I'm not in that mental space as much as I was. Because it can be pretty exhausting and it can start affecting other things in my life that I don't want to be that intense about. So I'm much more deliberate and strategic. And when I get to that space, I try to be. I'm not
Hmm.
perfect. Like sometimes I can go there real quick. Also being AG, being an S1, you learn very quickly how to adapt to your surroundings because you can be assigned to any type of unit and you have to adapt to that culture, especially when you're the one that's taking care of those people's personal lives, working very hand in hand with the NCOs. And my intensity coming from my first assignment being a postal platoon leader, then deploying and coming back, and then being assigned to the White Falcons in the 82nd. It's a different, I'm in that intensity all the time in that space as a battalion S1 and White Falcons. Um, and it's just a different sport. Like you match that intensity of the game that's being played in order to perform, in my mind, perform on the court. So I think I found myself looking back as a battalion S1 in an airborne infantry battalion, then going to the 75th Ranger Regiment. I'm playing with a different team of players. I'm playing a different sport. 75th Ranger Regiment, those are professional athletes. Physically, intensity wise, competitive wise, training, even just working on staff, doing what you need to do for them. You are playing on a professional team versus playing on a college team. And that's how I looked at it. And so that intensity level, there's much more risk, there's much more at stake. My accuracy has to be that much more, I have to be that much more attentive to my accuracy because there's more casualties, there's more on the line. And so I had to match that intensity. And once I left that environment, going from those two units back to back, it took me quite a while to come down from that intensity. And now I'm in a space where it's not as effective for me to be like that. Being in the unit that I'm in now, or even going to the IPSE team, coming out of 75th Ranger Regiment, doing a training with industry with civilians, it's not effective leadership to perform or act or behave in the same way. So I really had to adjust quite a bit of that within myself and my communication style, my interpersonal skills, because it's just not as effective. And then I think I found over time, as I started adjusting and really like working on myself, overall, I'm more effective with this space that I am within myself now. But if I had to go back to that space, I mean, I think I would probably relapse really quick.
I was kind of thinking about that a little bit before we got on the call here to talk about it, because it seems like, and we are a fitness podcast, but this whole conversation won't necessarily be fitness and stuff, but it does seem like what you prioritize in terms of fitness and like where your health and wellness and things have been at has kind of like followed kind of a sine wave with the assignments in your career. And I'm wondering like when performance was the highest as measured by like physical performance, what did that mean for the rest of your health and wellness? Like was there a trade-off there? Did it all flow together, or did you have to sacrifice certain things for that kind of performance and be able to get into those kind of levels of intensity and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's funny you asked that, because that's where I came up with the term balance your grit. Because when I was at my 10 out of 10 grittiness, I wasn't taking care of myself. And that's really where my entire vision of my page and really where my Instagram started and my mentoring other women started, was because that extreme high intensity, I compartmentalized my personal health and my own mental health. I neglected it completely. My identity, my femininity, I was neglecting it. And it got to a point where it almost turned into it turned into this internal misogyny of resenting my body or resenting myself or resenting anything feminine or anything woman, because I had to be something that in my mind, this consistent narrative where 90% of the time, anything that is talking about my body being a woman, or just me being different, it always had something negative associated to it. Even the terms like "I don't care you're a woman" or "I don't care," like that still is a negative thing, to where my brain at least, started recognizing like they don't care who I am. They don't care that I'm different. They don't care about the things that make me effective here because I am a woman. And then I stopped caring. And I matched that intensity to a point where I really lost my identity as Sidney. And at the time, I just became Captain Jaques, who has to overcome and not be all of these things. And I have to be something else. And that really took a toll, like just being so focused on proving myself or matching the same physical ability and matching the same work performance, which I was doing. I just neglected all of these other things that made me unique and made me different, that also made me really good at my job. And that mindset, that constant conflict and neglect of myself, some decision-making ability of being secure with myself and making hard decisions. I wasn't as secure with making hard decisions. And that's really, really, once I started talking to other women and once I started talking to other friends that were going into the same environments, this constant conversation of like neglect of yourself as a woman and those differences, instead of masking them and hiding them and starting to hate them and starting to resent them, instead of us embracing it. I started recognizing similar patterns within many of us. And then that's what created Balance Your Grit. and that term of it is like taking care of that grit that got you to where you are and maintaining that grit inside of you and sustaining it and taking care of yourself holistically and spiritually, mentally, and maintaining your identity and your value of yourself and value of your grit rather than just being so focused and so headstrong and losing yourself. So that's really where that entire thing came from.
Do you, this might be a weird question, and it's sort of fleshing itself out in my brain as I'm saying it, but like, do you think that there is room for a more feminine archetype in environments like that? Or do you think that just by virtue of the selection process for those types of units and sort of the person that they attract and the culture and blah, 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 you end up with this razor's edge archetype effectively that just copy and pastes itself. And if you don't fit that mold, you aren't going to do well. I mean, do you see a place for a different type of person? And maybe like male, female, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but just allow, do you feel like there was do you feel like there is space for you to have been yourself?
It's already there, right? Like look at feminine characteristics. What are they? It's empathy, right? You even use empathy in MI to put yourself in the enemy's position to understand who they are and what they think. You use empathy to understand your soldiers and how to communicate to them. Another feminine characteristic is teamwork, right? Pulling a team together and valuing the other person. You use femininity in patience and sometimes taking a tactical pause when you need to. You use it in all of those traits. They are feminine traits. We just don't acknowledge it because of, honestly, you know, misogyny or insecurity in acknowledging that those are feminine traits. And then you look at masculinity, which is competitive. Yeah, we accept that. Intensity, got it. Aggression, yes, that's there. But if you look at that table of feminine traits, we are taught those as leaders. And those NCOs, those commanders, those soldiers, like we all have that in us already as leaders. We just fail to actually acknowledge it and accept that because it's typically looked at as weak. But, you know, think of your best commanders. They have those traits. They have that ability to stay calm, you know, to be nurturing, to care about your soldiers. Those are feminine things. And the deeming feminine as negative, well, it's contradictory. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So before we go into some potentially harder questions, one I wanted to ask was, like, before you came on, I spent like an hour or so last night looking at some of your previous posts on social media, and less so about your posts and more about the comments sections. And there's some very different characters, and depending on the post, and much like I have learned with being active on social media, the more popular the post gets, the more toxic and useless the comments get.
Yep.
And my question is not about like how do you handle that, because all that stuff is pretty stupid. My question is kind of, did you experience issues with those types of reactions when you were in the 82nd and 75th and things like that? Or was the environment there more supportive, or how does it compare?
Well, I mean, obviously, if we're looking at the ratio, like one post, right? Like one post that has, you know, 70,000 views, that's 70,000 people, you're going to get more comments, right? Just standing in a room with 70,000 people, I don't think I've ever stood in a room with 70,000 people able to line up and talk to me. So I'm going to get more negative comments right there in that instant. In person, prior to social media, yes. Yeah, I mean, and that's why I leave the comments now. I'm at the point now where I've very much matured and grown within myself, where I am getting more comfortable with handling those on a public platform, because I know that my page helps a lot of other women and it allows other women to see that they're not the only one that experiences those. And I think it just really exposes this toxic underculture that we have. But to the purpose of your question, asking me about, the in-person stuff when I was in the 82nd and 75th, yes, those things happened a lot. And I think, reflecting back on Sydney at that point of my life, I knew what I was signing up for, right? Like I knew I was at risk for things like that to happen to me in person. And my tolerance level just grew so much that it started to kind of become normal. And especially when I was at 75th, this was my internal narrative, right? Can I curse on this? I can curse on this, right?
Absolutely.
My internal narrative was like, who the fuck are you to complain? Right? Like, I'm in the 75th Ranger Regiment. There's a lot of men here who have lost a lot of friends, who have been through some serious shit, who have seen combat more times than they probably should have. That's healthy for a person to experience. There's people here who are struggling physically with a lot of problems, with substance abuse problems, right? Divorces, just like they're struggling with a lot of effects of constant deployment, and they're still performing and they're still sacrificing. Who the fuck am I to ask for help from comments? And that, going back to your intensity topic and that compartmentalization of that type of treatment, that covert treatment. And also it's really hard to prove. And then, if I was to report, those comments that were happening to my face or behind my back or rumors, if I was to report every single one, I wouldn't be able to do my job. I would just constantly be filling out sworn statements. I wouldn't be able to be a good S1. I wouldn't be able to be a good leader. I wouldn't be able, like, I would literally just have been doing reports all the fucking time. And I was there to work. And then that's one of the other reasons I run my page, which is I said I didn't know who else to really reach out to. I didn't realize that the other women were going through the same thing. I didn't have another senior woman that I didn't reach out to anybody. I didn't ask for help. I didn't want to seem like it was easier to be in denial, I think, and just focus on my job and focus on like surviving that stuff. It was just easier to not deal with it and to do my job. And it doesn't happen as much anymore. I think there's also, doing every phase twice at Ranger School. So I went to Ranger School 3 months after I went to RASP. So like my third month while I was at 75th, I needed to get to school. I needed to get to Ranger School and get it done. So I went to Ranger School already having a scroll on my uniform. And I was the second one assigned there, and I made it through the push-ups, which it hadn't happened yet by the other woman, and she's Ranger qualified now, so it doesn't matter. And every single day at that school, what I experienced there, I didn't really have time to process what I went through there. Once I graduated, 6 phases later, I didn't have time to process it because I just wanted to ignore it and get back to work. So I never took the time to care for myself and actually heal and reflect and address what I was going through until I left the unit, because I was like, I'm here for 2 years and it's head down fucking work, which looking back on it was not responsible. And which is why now I have this network and I have this really open door policy with other women to have someone to talk to prepare them before they go to RASP, to prepare them before they go to Ranger, or to like be preventative to them getting to that mental space that I was, or to help them once they're there. because once that denial bubble bursts, that's a very vulnerable space to be in where bad decisions typically are made. And I just want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to be someone that they can turn to.
So there are like 5 other questions I want to ask you at this point. We've touched on a bunch of different things, but I think we'll start by returning to like why we're on this call in the first place, right? I've been following you for going on a year now, ever since we had Emma on the podcast and she recommended you. But the the more immediate thing that brought you on here is you put up a post that was talking about like I haven't told my whole story. And I just want to know, because we've kind of skirted around it a little bit in the last few minutes. You've mentioned some things, some directly, some indirectly, things like that. How much of that story do you want to tell, or are you willing to tell here, just so we can provide context before we go into some of the work you're doing now?
This is why I was really excited about this podcast, because I know you guys are going to ask the hard questions.
We're just investigative journalists over here.
So there is this term inclusion, right? Especially when we're talking about these environments, the infantry environments. My concern, and this is what I help a lot of younger women through, and also male leaders that reach out to me, just to have someone to bounce something off of, right? So if we're honestly, no shit, talking about inclusion in those infantry environments, in those combat arms maneuver unit environments, not all standards are followed, right? And it's almost like sometimes those are the things that kind of build morale in a way, and it doesn't make it right. Especially in kind of teetering on that reckless behavior. And from my experience, and from the experience of many of my girlfriends, once you hit that full inclusion where you are included in certain behavior or like team bonding things, now all of a sudden it's a problem because the woman is participating in something. Now all of a sudden it's a huge fucking issue and she's a problem. And that kind of happened to me. And I made a bad decision. I didn't, and it also kind of hit me when I was feeling the most lonely and most isolated. And then all of a sudden there was an opportunity for me to feel like I felt back in the 82nd. Not saying that I was doing reckless, wrong things back in the 82nd, but I felt like finally, I feel like I'm being included. Finally, now I'm feeling that teamwork with these guys, and I'm feeling a part of the team. Like they're my friends. And I made a bad decision, and I was walking such a straight line, such a be perfect and do not fuck up, do not make a mistake. And I was following that intense pressure that I was putting on myself and society was kind of putting on myself. And I followed suit with substandard behavior. And and that kind of led to, and I know I'm not being really specific because I'm not fully comfortable being extremely specific with all of it. And I thought my world ended, and I was held accountable, as people who don't follow the rules are held accountable. And I was held accountable, but I was the only one that was held accountable. And that heartbreak, like that feeling of absolute heartbreak of me being the only one not being held accountable, was more heartbreak than divorce, was more heartbreak than being cheated on in a relationship, was it completely crushed me. Being like, all of these thoughts start going through your head as to why is this happening to me? And that sent me to a really dark place. especially after everything that I was dealing with that I wasn't talking about, that I wasn't bringing up to my leadership and not giving them a chance to, know what was really going on with me every single day. And then that happening, that I'm just really grateful that I'm able to do these things now and to speak and to help other women and making sure that I'm doing what I can, when something like that happens to them, which I am not the only one that has happened to. Trying to take that experience, that really dark place, and take that experience and do something good with it. If you cut that from the podcast because I really didn't answer it very clearly, that's fine. But that's
Hell
really
no.
as comfortable as I am going.
So absolutely not getting cut, and totally respect keeping it vague. Totally understandable. But I'll ask a question that I don't think will require you to get more specific,
Mhm.
but will help clarify kind of where the issue was here. Is the kind of thing you got held accountable for something that sort of happens all the time among the boys, and it
Yeah,
was an issue because you were a woman?
I think whew,
Take your time.
I think it was hmm, I think being a woman definitely played a part in it, but I'm not pulling the woman card on it.
Sure.
Um, it's a high visibility thing that I signed up for. And
It's a high visibility thing you signed up for, but it's higher visibility
yeah,
because of who you are.
yeah. And what that represents. And how do I answer this with it and not being like, oh, it's because I'm a woman. That's not what it is. It's because of what that completely represented, which was progress and
Mm.
upholding the standard and showing that, that it isn't risky. And what you also find is when you introduce a woman into some of these environments, and a lot of us firsts have found ourselves in the very same situation that I'm in, that I was in, a lot of us. And I have come to the conclusion that one, it's that, right? You put somebody in there that has a spotlight and you're apprehensive to how well they're going to become included. And then once they hit that full on inclusion, then now it's a problem. Now you can't, because there's a spotlight as well. You can't just sweep it. You can't handle it like you would handle it with somebody else. And now that seems like I'm saying all of that stuff happens and leaders know about it and it's swept under the rug or whatever. But like, because I had that visibility, you can't not do something. So because I was a woman and because I had that spotlight and because I was filling a certain position, like, you can't not do something about it and you can't not enforce a standard. My issue was that I was the only one. To me, that is where a lot of the pain came from. So
Were you, I guess at the time this was going on, were you sort of aware of this narrative you just told us and sort of the, I guess, trials, tribulations, struggles? Were you aware of all that at the time? Or was this after the fact you turned back around and said, I think that happened because of who I am, what I represent, etc.?
what do you mean?
I guess what I'm asking is like, is this a perspective that an older version of you has now come to terms with and kind of recognized, or was this younger version of you aware of what was going on, and that's why it was such a dark moment?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I can look at it much more rationally now.
Hmm.
And I understand the decisions and why the certain decisions were made. I get it. Um, I've also worked really hard to find peace within myself with some of those things. And I can look at it from a different lens now. I can look at it from certain people's perspectives. And I know more about the situation now to know that, there were leaders that were looking out for me and taking care of me in ways that I didn't know.
Mhm.
And I will forever be grateful for that, which is why, you know, you're not going to hear me talk poorly about certain units because, and all of this was new. All of this it was a different type of spotlight. It was a different type of visibility. At the time when it happened, I was so lost and so confused and so disappointed in myself and so like angry and disgusted with myself at the same time, losing my identity, like losing Sidney and not realizing it, not talking to people, not putting two and two together while I had all of this internal conflict going on and masking it with addiction to work and addiction to being an S1 and just putting that in front of absolutely everything. And when you are neglecting all of those things, once that bubble starts to rise and it bursts and you're just not prepared for it because everything that mattered to me was working.
Mhm.
It was just a lot to process, as well as the fact that I never really took the time to address some of the things that happened to me at school. The one person that I did try to start talking to did not get to maintain her job. And the things that she wanted to diagnose me with and start treating me with, I didn't get to do that because she wasn't able to continue working. So there was a lot of confusion and there was a lot of mistrust from my end. And that's why when I go back to the term of like maturity, I'm in a different maturity space now, years later, because I've done the work to heal and I've done the work to reclaim my identity as to who I am and what I'm doing with that experience and doing everything I can out of loyalty to that unit and still out of loyalty to those cultures because they don't deserve to have to deal with that situation either. So yeah.
Well, it's almost like we planned this because that was a perfect transition to a question I wanted to ask you. And it's one that I don't know, Alex, if it was me or you that came up with this acronym when
It
we had
was you.
Was it me when we had Emma on the AWITA acronym, Ambitious Women in the Army?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad that it's become sort of a thing. And I'm curious for you as sort of the yeah, I mean, you're a card carrying member of the Ambitious Women in the Army Club, and having gone through what you've gone through and gotten to where you are now, talking about maturity and all that, like, what does that mean to you to be an ambitious woman in the Army? Like, what is that identity for you now?
I think for me, I see it my job. So this is also like my loyalty still to 75th, right? With charters and going there and learning, right? And adopting certain things about the culture and even learning tactics, learning certain weapon systems and learning the culture of units like that, and then going back to the conventional force and spreading that culture. Consistently going back and forth, right? And that's a part of serving there. And for me, you know, I left there and there's no job for me to go back to as an AG officer. I filled the job, right? I filled the Brigade S1 position. So, you know, I can leave there and I can bring my AG skills and my combat experience as an AG officer and bring that with me and share that. But you know, like that's definitely part of why I went to the IFSA team. But in a more serious level and a more purposeful level and a much more, to me, more responsible thing for me to do is making sure that every woman there is better than the one before her. And it should be like that. Like it should be these women who are commissioning now or enlisting now and have certain visions and certain goals. What am I doing to make sure that they're better than I was? To continue making the team stronger. And that's what that means to me. I'm not going to gatekeep anybody. I'm not going to tell any woman that I meet that seems a little bit different or thin, right? Or nerdy, or I'm not going to discourage any woman from pursuing something. I'm going to give her honest feedback and coach her and give her my honest story in more detail than here, right? Because I want her to succeed, not just for her, but for the guys around her. I don't want the leaders, the position that I put my leaders in, which was selfish of me, and immature of me, right? I don't want any leaders to be put in that position of like, what do we do?
Hmm.
I don't want peers to be put in that position because somebody could have kept their head straighter and knowing what to expect or having someone to talk to once they start feeling like they're slipping. And that's what I feel like my responsibility is as being a card holding member is like, and sometimes that's purely showing the comments. Okay, okay, so and so, like you want to go into these environments. This is not to scare you, you know. This is to just give you a little bit of a heads up of some of the things that you're going to experience. But you also have an example of someone who is showing you how to handle it. That you're not alone, that you're not the only one that's going to be experiencing this shit, and how to not let it get to you. You have someone, you have like a bigger sister or an aunt figure or something like that, because I'm old enough now. But like you have someone that you can talk to. I didn't talk to anybody and I didn't know who to talk to. So that's, my responsibility now, I think. Like in Emma, that's what Emma and my relationship is. She called me at a really significant low point in her life. And um, I still feel like her big sister because I want her to thrive. Like what do I do? What did I do any of that for if I'm not actually looking back and helping them get even better and get it to help that unit continue to get better?
What would you say is kind of the most common ask, request, question, problem set that women in the military come to you for help with?
I think philosophically, I think it's validating that they're not going crazy. Um, I think it's like validation that their intuition is correct. So I mean, it's your typical problems, but I think that's the common denominator, right? Like it's the common thing is like a lot of the women that I talk to, especially because you got to think about like the cohort of women who are calling me and reaching out. Like these are already women who are like they're in the ambitious women of the Army Club. They're already there. They're just getting their feet wet and they're just getting settled and they're figuring themselves out in it and they're learning how to move in it and they're learning how to navigate that space. And they already have what it takes to be successful. But a common thread is me just listening and asking questions and reminding them like, yeah, that is fucked up that that happened. And sometimes like that's literally all they need to hear is that like you are not looking too far into this and you are not being dramatic. You're not giving into this stereotype that you're complaining. Like, no, this is wrong. That is so unbelievably unprofessional. And you have a responsibility to either do something about it or talk to somebody about it and learn how to process it. You know what I'm saying? Like you can make a decision on how you want to handle it, but you have to make a decision on how you want to handle it. And that's typically a lot of the conversations that I have is helping them just realize that you're not reading too far into this and you're not being overly dramatic and you don't have to deal with this, right? Like that is wrong. And it's not your fault. You just being there is exposing some pretty horrific things from that leader or that peer or that subordinate. And that might sound so freaking basic, but just for someone to hear that, like, because with dudes, like, I'm friends with, I have so many dude friends, right? Like, obviously, I've been in those units, and these guys have other men around them that they can talk to. When you don't have all of those women around you, where when something happens on the spot and there's 4 or 5 other women around, that's fucked up. And you don't have that interpersonal validation from other people who are there and seeing it and witnessing it, and you don't have that, then you have this constant dialogue within yourself, wondering, like, am I being dramatic? Am I looking into that? Am I wrong? Is my intuition right? Like, you get very confused.
A thought that comes to mind for me with that, though, is I wonder if it's, you mentioned, with men having a lot of other men around to sort of, I guess, quality control or whatever. I almost wonder if what you're getting at is a much bigger problem than just being a female isolated sort of thing. Because on the male side, you could, I guess, make the case that because you're surrounded by so many men, you do have this perception that you might be the only one who is dealing with something internally. And then that also forces you to keep things to yourself. I think really what we're getting at there is a bigger conversation around male, female, regardless of the environment, being in a space and promoting a space that allows for more vulnerability when something fucked up happens, or you have this internal dialogue and you feel like you can't share it with anybody. But certainly I see your point of, if you're an N of one as a female in that environment, it almost makes it more challenging because you feel isolated and alone.
It's also the military, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have this rank structure, and we have customs and courtesies, right? You have an expectation of how you are supposed to perform, or you can't just publicly check your commander. If you're a sergeant, a group of male sergeants and one female sergeant, and your battalion commander or your company commander says something stupid, like, you're not, what do you think is gonna nothing's gonna happen, right,
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, like, sometimes, most of the time. So or if that person significantly outranks you and there's no tangible proof of something, even if there is tangible proof, I mean, we're talking about young adults that we're in this military culture of what it means to be a commander, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be in those positions of power. And then you have somebody who is not really in a position of power. The process of reporting, or the process of talking about it to someone and not knowing if they're going to report on your behalf when you don't want something to be reported because you're worried about something being reported, it's exhausting. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's easier to just ignore it. But then once that builds up, it can truly affect your decision making on other things that really do start being reported. Your tolerance level continues to increase, to the point where I'll get a phone call from a girl and I'm like, holy shit. An hour into the phone call, everything that she's experiencing, and she doesn't even see it because her tolerance is so high. Like, her resiliency is so incredibly high, and her grit is just so, like, I'm like, girl, like, this is not okay. This is not okay what you're experiencing. And then handling that conversation in a way that's, through empathy and compassion. Because once that realization hits, it can be a really scary space to be in, once you come out of denial. And there's, and somebody listening to this could be like, well, that's why women shouldn't be there. And it's like,
Hopefully people like that don't know how to operate their smartphone to get to Spotify to even listen to this in the first place.
yeah, you'd be surprised.
I know.
And you know that.
If I've observed any trend here, it's that those type of people tend to have private accounts with cartoons as profile pictures, and they follow 10 times as many pages as follow them. And it's
Yeah.
like they're extremely easy to identify immediately, and you generally can just discount whatever's coming from
The
that.
follow or followee ratio being a red flag, I think, puts me in red flag territory because I follow way more things than follow me. I'm not that cool.
Oh, just don't
Yeah.
start shit in the
And I have
comments and you're fine.
shit. I have a cartoon. Ah, man.
Drew's in trouble. It's
Oh.
you can see all sorts of it if you go on Sydney's comment sections. It's pretty wild.
It's and like the one that's going like kind of viral right now with my party blouse. It's like,
That was cool.
dude, it's like you know the first party blast I ever saw
It was probably a colonel or something.
was the commanding general of the 82nd
Yeah.
Airborne Division
Yeah.
when he was my brigade commander and came to our dining out 2 weeks before we deployed, and he had a party shirt on.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird, but that's also like awesome that he's willing to throw down and like bring some personality and be who he is, which like that man, he would tell me to like, I'm very grateful that I got to work for him. Really, really grateful that I got to say that my timeline crossed with his at some point. And that like, okay, so are you going to say that to him?
Can you explain
You
for people
want
that
to say
have
that?
for people that have
Like-
no clue what you're referencing? Can you explain the Britney Spears on the back of the?
So this is also my first party shirt too. My first AG ball. Typically all of my balls have been like infantry culture. So like,
Well, let's not talk about what goes on at infantry battalion balls and stuff. Like that's an entire separate story. And there's
Y'all
a
never
reason
been
it
to a
doesn't get-
civilian
yeah, I mean,
ball.
AG can get down too.
Yeah.
It's just a different kind of get down. But yeah, so I got my AGSUs, which is great because I don't look like a flight attendant. And
Thank you for making that comp. I've been saying that for years. Nobody believes me.
yeah, it's just horrific. And so I made my own party blast this year where I ordered a shirt with Britney Spears's just when she went unhinged and she shaved her head and she just snapped on the paparazzi because they just wouldn't let up, and she just started smacking a car with her umbrella and she fucking lost it. And then that was just another reason for just more hate and more hate and more hate and just ruining this girl in 2007 Britney. And it's just an iconic photo of like her about to hit the shit out of this car with her green umbrella. So I ordered a shirt with that screen printed on it, cut the normal paper size thing, so it's big, cut it out, sewed it to the back of my AGSU blouse, and then I ordered a bedazzle gun and just and I just bedazzled it. I turned the umbrella. Like I followed all of the contours and the color changes and extended the umbrella beyond the photo so it looks like she's carrying a rifle. And then I gave her like kind of like a halo and just highlighted certain things about what she was wearing. I gave her little red eyes, little red gems in her eyes. I actually gave her a little Ranger tab. I don't know if you can tell.
Oh, I didn't see that part.
Yeah, and it was just very like symbolic of like the point at which you're driven to insanity of just from whatever. And the fact she has a shaved head in it, and it was just beautiful. And yeah, everybody loved it at the ball. Like it was just a hit. Like the number of photos I was taking with people, like people getting it. And I'm also around the AG branch, AG Corps, which is like they're typically, the butt end of every joke anyway. So they kind of got it. They understood. And if somebody didn't, like I don't care.
Well, that's something I want to address real quick because I ended up in your comments because of this a little bit. But there are plenty of people who like their career might not have been as long, or they went to different units or things like that, who might not have been exposed to party shirts, party blouses, whatever you want to call it. It's more for whatever reason, it's more common among people who've like spent time in Korea. I think because there are a bunch of tailors there who do special like sleeve customization stuff and all these things.
Yeah, they go
Um,
great. Like there's some insane ones.
yeah, it's definitely super common in the Air Force, but I've seen it plenty around the Army. Like this is not like a thing you just decided to do that was crazy. Like this is an
Hmm.
established tradition. Like you said, the commanding general did it at a ball you went to. I've seen plenty. It's honestly, I see it more among lieutenant colonels and above than I see it in any other rank category.
Yeah.
Maybe because they feel like no one's going to say shit
I
to
was going to
them.
say they can't get in trouble for it.
But like, there's no way there would have been comments like the ones you got if it was just a guy doing it with like funky pattern sleeves or whatever. And to be clear, the way it works is you only do this for like balls or special events and stuff. And it's only the shirt. So that if you put the jacket on, nobody can see anything wrong with your uniform. And so when you transition from the formal part of the ball to the informal part of the ball, you take your jacket off and it's a little more fun and relaxed and stuff. That's all it is. This
Yeah.
is nothing, I don't know. The reactions were a little unhinged.
No, it's just exposing the standard being enforced on a certain group of people. And it goes even like, the comments of like standards with Ranger School, like standards with this and that, standards being enforced and all of this stuff. And it's like the standard is enforced in every single way possible on people like me because there isn't an option not to. And that's from my experience. If I'm wrong with that, because there's other people who genuinely have different experiences seeing women not being held to standard. But for me, like even with Ranger School, the standard that I had to meet. Also, I went through at 28 years old. Like I'm not going right out of BOLIC. Like I had two deployments in a month-long TDY in Africa under my belt at that point. I had RASP under my belt. Like I'm 28, and I know what a standard is, and I know what consistency is, and I know what fairness is, and I know how the Army works, and I know how schools work. I also know that a number of those RIs were kicked out of regiment. I know that a number of those officers who were RIs put RASP packets in and didn't get selected. So like I already know the environment that I'm working in here, and I already know what a standard looks like. And many times the standard that I had to meet was unattainable by anybody. And so if we're talking about enforcing standards, allow me, please define a standard, right? Do you want me to be included? Like, do you want me to be a part of the culture? Then I'm wearing a fucking party blouse because that's a part of the culture. But now it's outside the standard. So what is the standard? Is it a social standard? Is it a physical standard? Is it you just don't want me to be there and you just don't want to know that somebody other than someone that looks like you can actually meet a standard?
Well said. I do want to hit one thing that this is circling back just a little bit to something Drew asked earlier, but he asked about the kind of questions you're getting from women. And I do want to ask, because you've alluded to this already in the conversation, what kind of questions are you getting from men?
Oh yeah, those are awesome ones. So like there's a lot of guys that reach out and they'll be like, "Hey, I have this situation. This is how I think I'm going to handle it. What are your thoughts?" I get a lot of questions from cadets that are like, I'm really terrified of becoming a shit leader or a shitty guy towards women that I'm leading. What do I need to be concerned with? Like, what are some pieces of advice? Um, there's men that reach out and they're like, at first I really didn't like you, but it's opened my eyes to something more. And, I've learned a lot. There's men that ask me how to attend certain conferences or like what things that they can do to start keep learning more because they're realizing that like, you know, certain things that I post and it's not me teaching anybody. It's me just providing a space for the brain to open up a little bit and maybe look at things differently. But I love those questions of like those younger leaders that are like, I don't want to be a shitty leader. I don't want to be that person that those girls that I'm leading resent or come to hate or don't feel safe with. And my answer to that is literally the same thing every time. It's the fact that you're asking me this question, you're going to be fine.
Hmm.
And the fact that you are concerned and the fact that you are thinking about it and the fact that you want to be good to them, just like you are good to your men, you're going to be just fine. And when you have a scenario that you don't necessarily know how to handle, it's your responsibility to create a network of mentors and peers of all types of diversity that you can bounce these things off of. So that's my answer to that one every single time.
I dig it. We do have a bunch more things we want to ask you and talk about, but I know you got a Brooks and Dunn concert to get to. How much longer can you hang out with us before we gotta let you
I
go?
can rapid fire. I can rapid fire.
Okay, we'll try and keep some of these fast. Then
Okay.
we'll do some rapid fire stuff.
Brooks
One,
and Dunn.
Oh, hell yeah.
she has a whole explanation for why. If she wants to do it, she can, or we'll just go to rapid fire. Up to her.
No, go for it.
Okay.
Rapid fire.
So we are a human performance / fitness kind of podcast. You have posted about not really trying to talk about fitness on your page, but clearly it's something a lot of people ask you about because you've achieved some physically demanding things.
Yeah.
If you had to do it in a rapid fire way, is there any fitness advice you would give, whether it's specific to women or not, for people that are trying to follow in your footsteps?
Understand your athletic style, and how your body moves and what type of fitness works for you. You know, there's a bunch of different fitness plans that are out there, but if you're not enjoying the training and if you're not enjoying what you're doing to become fit, it's not as effective as it can be if there's a different style that you actually enjoy going and doing those workouts and doing that style of working out. You know, there's different body types and there's different ways that, you know, our bodies move, different athletic abilities. But I think the most important thing is to find what you're enjoying, like the train and enjoying what you're doing to train for something that's going to not be very enjoyable as you go through it. That would be my first piece of advice.
Okay. Next one. This is probably hard to do in a rapid fire way, but you've been on a bunch of podcasts before ours. Hopefully, we brought out some things here that were a little bit different than some of those podcasts.
Hopefully, we're the best.
Yeah.
But what did we miss?
What did we miss? Okay, so one thing that I do want to talk about is like, you know, I think for women, and this is not me giving women a different advantage, it's very difficult for women to find other women who are going to endorse for them and recommend them for certain units or certain opportunities. Because also there's not a lot of women who have been in those spaces. And, you know, I advocate for all, right? So that's one of the things that I love going to these different symposiums or meeting different women that's like early on in their career and they're like, I just want more and I want to do more. I don't know where to start. I don't know who to reach out to. Typically, you know, you have a much larger pool of male mentors that maybe, you know, more comfortable having those conversations with young guys. I think that's starting to drift away. But there's something familiar with going to a woman who's been in a certain environment and coaching them on how to get to a certain space. Those are my favorite. Not my favorite. I have a lot of favorite conversations, but like I love those conversations with younger women, and it doesn't have to be lieutenants. You know, it can be NCOs, right? It can be anybody that's listening that's an AG staff sergeant or an AG sergeant first class, and you're just like, I want to get to a certain space. Just hit me up, and I have no problem putting you in touch with certain places that you need a reference or you need to get your foot in the door into a certain space to start getting more diversity and getting not because to lower standards, but because there's really qualified and very skilled women out there. They just don't know where to start to get their foot in the door somewhere. So I do a lot of that. So yeah, just reach out to me. Guys too.
Hell yeah.
Guys too, that's fine too. Yeah, of course.
One last one. And this is from before we started hitting record.
Wait, one last one for you. I have two very important ones.
This is the last rapid fire from Alex. Drew can use it on.
Two very important ones.
Before we hit record, we started to touch on a story, and I wanted to make sure because you said you wanted to save it for when we were actually on the episode. Right before we hopped on here, because you posted on your Instagram that you were going to come on with us, and I shared it so people know that we're recording right now. And one of my friends sent me a message that you absolutely saved his ass. And you seem to remember the story immediately, which is a surprise because he said you might not remember him at all. But I wanted to give you a second to share what that was.
Are we talking about the time that I delayed the might be because I maybe it might be a different one. Is this
you saved a lot of people?
Where yeah, well, I'm the S1. That's what you do.
Well, who knows? It could be you may have saved many lieutenants from many terrible fates.
I did,
but you can tell the story.
I've also turned lieutenants away at the door so that they wouldn't have to be saved, and told them to go back to brigade and find a different unit. But that was back before the AIM marketplace. Look,
Well, tell this story.
I'm not here to break hearts, I'm here to save hearts. Is this the one where he was running late to a meeting and I delayed the battalion commander?
I don't know the story, but that sounds like it could be it.
Okay, so I'm in my battalion commander's office and he's wanting to talk to all of the brand new lieutenants that just got out of Bolic and Ranger School, like what that year that was like triple as normal. And as a good S1, having accountability, knowing that everybody's in the room waiting for the battalion commander who's very proper and big on etiquette, like former Marine. And he was like, is everybody there? And I go in and I realize that one of them is not there. And I'm like, where the fuck is so-and-so? And my buddies are like, I don't know, he's had to close out a tasker or something like that. And we're also talking about a battalion commander that's already just fired 2 lieutenants and made me find them jobs at the Fort Liberty Tech Center. So he's not fucking around. And my buddy was running late and my buddy wasn't there. And so I'm like, oh, shit. And I was like, how long does he need? Like, how long until he gets here? And I was given a time. So I went into my battalion commander's office and just made a complete like fool out of myself, just delaying him and delaying him and delaying him and like bringing up stuff where he's like, my name to him was S1. And he was like, S1, like, what are you talking about? Like, we don't need to talk about this right now. Like, I need to go talk to the lieutenants. And out of like the corner of my eye, I saw him just sprinting down the hallway, like literally sprinting down the hallway to the point where like he turned the corner to get to the conference room and like fucking skidded and slipped, like had to put his hand down like he's motorcycle racing or whatever. And he turned the corner, like got into the conference room, and I was like, okay, I was like, that's it from my end, sir. Like, I think we're good to go. And I don't know, I talked to him. He's retired now, like my battalion commander. I haven't really ever asked him if he ever knew. He probably doesn't even remember. And then, he came in and everything was fine. One of the people in the room had bright red face and everything like that, but everything kind of worked out fine. And he ended up being one of my really, really good friends that we deployed. I don't know if we deployed together or not, but I helped him with his RAS packet. He ended up going to 75th Ranger Regiment. And
I think this is the right guy then.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that like I served with a lot of really incredible men that went on to serve at 75th. And I was like, you know what, like that's who I want to follow, like the ones who are running late for meetings, but no. But like they're just really good guys. Like they were just incredible friends of mine. Absolutely incredible friends and brothers of mine that I was like, I want to keep working with them. I want to keep taking care of them and like saving their ass, which is why I inevitably built a packet to go there. So
well, Mike, if that was your story, she clearly remembers, and well done.
Love you, Mike.
What's your favorite Brooks and Dunn song?
Oh gosh.
You're about to go to the concert.
Probably Born to Run. Or a little Boot Scoot and Boogie.
I was gonna say, when you said Born to Run, in my head I had Springsteen. I don't know if I realized there was a
I am a Jersey girl. But no, Born to Run by Brooks and Dunn. But I mean Boot Scoot and Boogie, that's
Boot Scoot and Boogie. 209 million plays on Spotify.
The entire album of If You See Her, like my dad and I wore that cassette out, just driving to basketball practice like every single day. So that entire thing, like start to end, is just yeah.
Next question. Brooks or Dunn?
Whichever one has the mullet.
I'm looking at them on Spotify and I couldn't tell you who's who. We'll say Brooks.
Okay.
There you go. Well, speaking of, in an effort to get you out of here so you can actually go to their concert.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you. Yeah, you might get some pushback. I don't know. I hope you don't get any pushback.
I hope we do.
But that might just be
we do.
That might just be a trauma response to me. Like it might just be a trigger because I really like it's a tough situation. And I know it's risky for me talking about certain things, but I just want to make sure that like I really don't have any ill will. Not that I'm someone who should or shouldn't I'm nothing special, you know, and nothing that I was sharing was meant to disparage anything. It's purely meant to, you know, that story is not unique to me. There's a lot of people that find themselves in that situation, and there's a lot of women that find themselves in that situation. And then it's one, how to prevent those situations from happening, which is why I'm doing what I do with my Instagram, whether people realize that or not. So one, it's, you know, how to prevent those things, and that's through teamwork, and that's through having mentors, and that's through having sisters to sisters that aren't just going to let them fucking flop on their face, but actually help them prevent making bad decisions. And then it's also, you know, once those poor decisions are made, making sure they get back up and get back into the fight faster than it took me. So that's really where it's all coming from.
Awesome.
Well, if it helps with any of the anxiety around telling some of the story and what kind of response it might get, I'll tell you that you talked earlier about like maturing and figuring out how to respond to the things people say and things like that. And I've had to go through a little bit of that. I used to attend every fight I was invited to. I've had to learn to walk away a few times now. But I will tell you and this is the reason we have a podcast, is because the social media environment lends itself to hot takes and dunking on people and whatever kind of nasty stuff does really well over there. Over here, at least, you're at least filtering down to people who care enough to listen for an hour or so. And those kind of people tend to care a lot more about being productive. So the audience on this side of the line tends to be pretty awesome.
Yeah. So we'll see.
But thank you, and have fun at
If
your
it
concert.
doesn't work out, we can always record again.
Anytime.
Looking forward to it. Come on back.
Say what you just. How do we start these?
I think we just start them.
Okay, do what you just did.
Well, I think before I say what I just said off air, which we're going to do again on air because it's important, I think there's a little bit of context around this. I think most people who are active on social media and military circles probably have a decent idea that Sidney is a somewhat controversial character. Not everybody loves her stuff. We talked about plenty of that in the episode. But without knowing the details of her situation, with only knowing kind of the vague context around it, what she was willing to share, I feel pretty comfortable saying plenty of guys have done things like that and not had it end up negatively affecting their career. And I think whether or not you think whatever she did was so terrible, I think it's hard to dispute the fact that she has used it to grow personally and professionally and now dedicates a pretty tremendous amount of her time to helping other people because of it. And it's hard to demonize that. You can disagree with her style. You might think she's controversial or adversarial or whatever, but it's hard to argue against the purpose behind what she's doing.
Well, and I mean, I think there's probably a certain subset of people who see her thing and think about her story or whatever and write her off as like, oh, that's just whatever one-off thing. But the fact that she's able to have a platform that has been as successful as it has, clearly it's being floated by similar scenarios happening mostly to women, which makes me then come to the conclusion of like, oh, you don't like her story, fine. There's a lot of other stories like that you have to reckon with, and you can't just pretend because you're whatever that everybody should be like you or act like you.
Or maybe it's not that they don't like her story. Maybe it's that they don't like people that have stories like hers sharing them.
I don't think they like that her story is part of the fabric of the reality of organizations that they might be part of.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the same as, that's not specific to the military. That's anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, the fucking thing that you have on the bumper sticker of your car isn't like perfect. Well, you can either deal with that and talk to people like Sidney about it, or you can just pretend that they're assholes and then you're a dick.
I was just thinking, because she asked before she cursed on the episode, and you said it doesn't matter. I will be warning. In a recent episode, people heard that we had a class of sixth graders listening to our episode.
Yeah, dude, sixth graders today, man, they're worse than we are.
I'll give them a heads up that this might not be the episode to share with their students.
For probably a lot of reasons aside from cussing, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, this one's a little more like adult themes. How do we want to handle that? Yeah.
Yeah, I came into this not knowing a lot about. I mean, I'd followed her, and you and I talked about it, and Emma, and we keep saying Emma for folks in the episode. Emma Palace is the episode we had a while back, but
It'd be pretty weird if you were a current listener of the podcast and hadn't listened to Emma's episode. It
right,
was by far the most popular episode of last year. So
right, and
if you're new, go back and listen.
I walked away from this like one being, I mean, I guess in as much as I'm allowed to say I'm proud of her for coming out, but like really respecting the fact that like she came onto a platform like this with an audience like we have, with a length of conversation that we do, and was willing to tell her story. I mean, that takes a lot of, can I say that takes a lot of balls? It takes a lot of guts.
I think that's fair. I haven't checked our metrics recently, but like last time I looked at it, we're pretty reflective. Our listener base is fairly similar to the demographics of the military. So yeah, this audience is
Checks out.
younger and male dominated. A
Hmm.
little bit older than the military is, I think. I think we don't have as many like junior people in the military listening to the podcast as we might like, but because those are the people we want to influence. But
So here's my takeaway, guys. Listen, if that story bothered you and Sydney's platform pisses you off, instead of getting in there and slinging some hate in the comments like a coward, maybe like talk to her about her experience, and maybe take a look in the mirror. Not that you're doing the same thing, but maybe you're part of a culture that enables the same thing. Because I guarantee, whether it's a female, a male, somebody around you is having a hard time with something. And that's really, I think, what we wanted to highlight, to tie it back into performance. Like, if you're struggling with a lot upstairs, you're not really going to be able to put out the way that you should. And so instead of just critiquing her for having a story, maybe go and listen to more stories and recognize that there's a lot going on. That'd be my takeaway.
mic drop.
Boom. See you next week. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.